So I'm going to start off just by introducing myself to you. If at any point you have any questions, feel free to just hop in and ask. This is going to be very informal, a way for you guys to get acclimated with, what personal finance is, budgeting is, and a little bit about what you can expect in your next steps. So a little bit about myself. My name is Amelia Bender. I graduated from high school in 2014, and I then went on to the University of Central Florida, where I studied finance. So the reason why I studied finance was because I was a freshman in college, and I remember about maybe 2 months into my first semester, I took a look at my bank account and I had $1.50 in my account. That's it. I didn't have a savings account, didn't have a credit card to fall back on. I couldn't ask my parents for more money. I was in this situation that I was, unsure how I got there and unsure how to fix it. At that point in time, I was studying management. And that really gave me the idea that I needed to change my path. I needed to figure out how I got there, why I only had $1.50 in my account, and how I could make sure that never happened again. So over the past 5 or 6 years since then, I have poured myself into learning everything I possibly can about not only corporate finance, but personal finance. I specifically studied personal finance, which is different from corporate finance because it's a little bit more of the things that we wish we learned in school before going to college. Things that, when people get to my age or even older, they feel almost ashamed about not knowing this information because they feel like they missed a day in life class that really was never provided to them. So I started Mills Knows Bills back in November with the mindset and passion to help everyone else that doesn't have this information get this information. So I'm taking all the material that I've learned over the past 5 or 6 years, and I'm hoping that by providing it to other people, it shortens their learning curve, that it doesn't take them 5 or 6 years to learn it. Instead, maybe it'll take them a year or a few months. And that way you can be empowered before you fall into the same mistakes that I made. So a little bit about what I do. I am a budget setting expert. So a lot of people that I sit down with ask me, well, what is a budget? It's really just a roadmap. It's an overview of your finances. It allows you to see your income and your expenses, money coming in, money coming out. And this is where a lot of people fail in their finances, is because they're just not sure what they actually are bringing in or spending. So I sit down with people and I help them figure out how to set a budget, what a budget looks like, and how they can stick to it. If this is a skill that you can learn before you go to college, start a full-time job, whatever your next steps are after graduation, you will be light years ahead of your peers, I promise you. So budget setting is so important because it shows you what you can and can't spend. It helps you realize that, by buying this extra pair of clothing, you will be in the red for that month, right? It helps you realize where you stand in general. So why should you care about setting a budget? Most of you, I'm assuming, are going to be going off on your own, whether it's attending further education, starting a full-time job, doing something in between, right? And a lot of people, like my friends and peers, they had to rely on financial aid to help support their further education, or they had to get some loans to help them as they grew in their full-time career after high school. So you want to make sure that you are making educated decisions when you move on to this next step in life. And you can't do so unless you know what you have, what you don't have, and you understand what the decisions you are actually making. You want to know what you're signing up for, right? You hear a lot of terms like FAFSA, financial aid, student loans, grants, but no one really ever sits down with you unless you seek that information out and explains to you what the differences are, explains to you what the repercussions could be if you don't follow through on your end of the deal, right? So what do you need to know and what do you need to keep an eye out for when you go to college or take on a full-time role? So common questions that I get all the time. Well, what is FAFSA? FAFSA is a free application for federal student aid. That's what it stands for. And that federal student aid can be really any combination of things: student loans, grants, scholarships. And the one that you really want to pay attention to are student loans. I can't tell you how many of my friends got student loans thinking that they never had to pay them back. They thought that they were grants or scholarships. Student loans, you don't have to pay back until a certain date, but there's interest also associated with it. So if you take out a loan for $5,000 and it comes time for you to pay that back, you're not just paying back $5,000. You could be paying back $8, $10, $15,000. It depends on how long you put that payment off. It's a lot of things that go into student loans. So a couple things that I really want to touch upon. Try to go for the scholarships and grants first if you can. If you absolutely must rely on student loans, make sure you look at what your interest rate will be. Also, another thing, I remember one of my best friends in college, she was approved for a $30,000 student loan, 18 years old. That's kind of scary, $30,000. And she accepted all $30,000. Two things I want to touch upon with that. Number one, just because you are approved for a certain loan amount does not mean you have to take the full amount. Number two, if you do take student loans, spend it on your education. Please don't use the money to go out and, get some food, or no, I'm sorry, not get food, dine out excessively or buy a car. My friend used it to buy a car. It's, yeah, Myra's chuckling, I can see. So a lot of times when I say, to clients, don't take out a loan more than what you need to, they always wonder, well, how much do I actually need? You're gonna have to do a little bit of research. If you are going to school, see how much your tuition is gonna cost you each semester. See how much your books are gonna cost you. It might take you a little bit of work, but out of that $30,000 loan that you're, eligible for, you might only need $5,000. And then you're not paying back interest on an extra $25,000. The other thing I wanted to mainly touch upon when people go to college or really full-time roles, credit cards. I remember 5-6 years ago now, walking to my student union for the first time, and there were a plethora of credit card companies there saying, oh, sign up, get a free shirt, sign up, get this, get that, right? Don't do it. Just don't do it. It's never a free lunch, okay? It's never just a free shirt. A lot of times people don't understand what credit cards actually are. It's a line of credit where you swipe your card and then that bill will become due. But if you're not sure what your login is or how to access that information, if it's your first time getting a credit card, a lot of times, my friends would realize that it go past the due date or they completely forgot about the credit card and they just keep racking up interest. One of my buddies in my networking group, she was telling me how she got a credit card and only spent like $200 on it, but then she completely forgot about it until a few years later, where she received this bill, now, full-time working, $2,500 was what she owed. So if you are going to get a credit card, be smart about it. Okay. Couple tips in that. Number one, credit cards are not bad. They aren't. The misuse of credit cards are bad. I think credit cards are very, very good, especially if you are out on your own and you don't have a lot of savings, but you need to prepare for an emergency. Credit cards are great. Second reason why credit cards are great, once you get to a certain status in your finances, you normally can be eligible for credit cards that have a lot of rewards and point systems. you can get a lot of free things out of that. Free airfare, free hotels. Sometimes you can leverage it to get gifts, things like that. So credit cards are not bad. I highly suggest getting a credit card and starting soon if you have the discipline not to overspend. And when I say not overspend, just because you have a $500 credit limit does not necessarily mean you have $500 in your bank account to pay that off in full. So know what money you have to pay and don't rack up your credit card. Couple tips to kind of go further in that. If you don't have any credit, so if your parents never put you on their credit card, so you don't have a credit score at all right now, if you don't have someone that you trust that you could get on as an authorized user for one of their credit cards to help build your credit, I would highly suggest getting a secured credit card. Difference between unsecured and secured is that unsecured means, right now I have a credit limit, or I have a credit history. So I can apply for a credit card, and without me paying for the credit card, except for the annual fee, they will give me a line of credit. The secured credit card is when someone doesn't have any credit history, they want to make sure that you are good for your money, right? So Capital One, I started out with a Capital One secured credit card, have nothing bad about it. You pay, I think it's $49 or $50, and that provides you a $200 line of credit. So what that means is by me paying the $50, they allowed me to have some extra leverage with credit. Discover has a lot of other credit card companies have student credit cards. Do your research, see which one you like. I have experience with Capital One. That's why I suggest that one. The app is also really great and user-friendly. And it also gives you reminders on when your credit card bill is due. It gives you an estimate for what your credit score could be, tips on how to improve your credit score. So it's really a good initial tool to use if you're not familiar with credit at all. So I briefly touched upon this point earlier. Don't spend what you don't have. So as I mentioned, just because you have a line of credit of $500 does not mean you have the full $500 in your checking account to pay it off, right? You want to make sure that just because you have that money to spend, when your bill comes due that 30 days later from the credit card company, you have that money in your checking account to pay it off in full. Where a lot of people get tripped up in credit card debt is when they swipe, and they can't pay it off in full. So the balance, they just pay the minimum that's due, right? And the balance is rolled over, but then they start getting charged interest. And if you don't have any credit history, your interest rate could be as high as, I think 27, 29% is the highest I've seen. Even now with a credit history, I think if I had a balance that carried over on my credit cards, it would still be pretty high of 19 to 23%, depending on the credit card. So, and that just keeps compounding too. It's not a one-time thing. If that balance rolls over one month, you get charged interest. If it rolls over another month, you get charged interest on the interest. It's compounding. So you want to make sure that you are not spending more than what you can pay in full. How can you make sure that? You don't want to spend more than 20% of your credit limit. So if you have a $100 credit limit across all your cards, you want to make sure you don't spend more than $20. Why? So credit scores are dictated by a lot of different pieces of information, mostly weighted in the amount of credit that you use. So credit companies, the three credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, those are the three companies that dictate what your credit score are. They have these algorithms and they create what's called your FICO score. You'll hear a lot about that if you haven't already. And your FICO score is based off of all these different pieces of information, but none of the credit bureaus fully explain how much is weighted in which. With a lot of research, you'll notice that a lot of them heavily weight it based off of not spending as much of your credit limit as you have. So in other words, the credit bureaus like to see that you have all this line of credit to use, but you only use a little bit amount. Don't know why. That's just part of the formula. So a good rule of thumb is to make sure that you don't spend more than 20%. So what I would do once I got my Capital One credit card was I would fill up my gas tank with it once a month. And then I'd go in and I'd pay it off so I would not forget. And I did that every month for a few months until I started seeing my credit score build. After about a year, maybe a year and a half, I was able to apply for another credit card that I did not have to do secured. I was able just to apply and get it. And that increased my credit limit, but I kept only swiping for that one tank of gas each month. And that really helped my FICO score skyrocket. So a couple things that I mentioned, credit-wise, Credit Karma, tools like that are really great to see generally what your credit score could be, but those are just estimated. You can't see, because the bureaus don't actually release the particular algorithms that they use, the formulas that they use, it's very difficult to get the exact credit score. But I've noticed CreditWise and Credit Karma are pretty spot on most of the time. So get a credit card if you don't have one, but make sure that you don't overspend on that. That was a general overview. I will open it up for questions. I know a lot of times after I give these types of presentations, people say, okay, it's great. I know I need to set a budget. I need to do this. I need to do that. How can I get that information? I actually have a free budget setting tool. It's very user-friendly that you plug in your information and it helps you set a standard budget right away. Really easy to use. And I also provide a lot of tutorials and videos on YouTube to help you ask all your questions or get all your questions answered. I bring in experts in particular industries to speak upon specific topics. So that's a really great resource for you to use as well. But I'm going to go ahead and open it up for any questions. I know I went a little fast, so if anyone needs me to go back on anything, please let me know.
I had one quick question.
Of course.
Is there anything important that we should look for in a when applying to a credit card when we have when we don't have any credit history?
So if you don't have any credit history, you're probably going to be forced to get a secured credit card.
Thank you.
You're welcome.